Hello and welcome to Speak Up, Listen Up, Follow Up, the podcast from the National Guardian's office. Throughout October's Speak Up month, the National Guardian for the NHS, Dr. Jayne Chidgey-Clark, will be in conversation with leaders against the theme of freedom to speak up for everyone, and she'll be exploring the impact speaking up can bring to safety, civility and inclusion. In our fourth and final episode of the Speak Up month specials, Jayne is joined by Danny Mortimer, the Chief Executive of NHS Employers and the Deputy Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation. In a special one episode, Danny is taking the reins from Jayne and is interviewing her to celebrate our final week of Speak Up month and discussing week 4's theme of freedom to speak up for everyone.
Actually, this isn't just about people speaking up and having systems and having a person or people who come around the organisation. It's about the challenge of what it really means, as a leader, as a board, to listen, to truly listen.
We will listen to understand. And that for me is the key, listening to understand.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now over to Danny.
Jayne, this is the kind of turn the tables of your podcast. So thank you so much for allowing me to be the kind of person who kind of puts questions to you rather than the other way around. And I guess the first thing to start, you've been in the job a wee while now, is just to perhaps understand a little bit more about why you wanted to be the National Guardian and how you found to be the National Guardian and how you found the role since you took it on.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. And it is very strange sitting in the hot seat, but I really welcome this opportunity to have a conversation with you. But as you say, with you doing the questions. So I'm a nurse by background, which I think most of our listeners will know. 35 years now. I have had experience of working in organisations with good cultures, and I've worked in organisations with cultures that need to be improved. I've worked in organisations where people have felt very much that they can speak up about patient safety, about behaviours, that's not been encouraged at all. And I think for me, as someone who has been both on the front line as a nurse, and also someone who's then worked in management and leadership roles, both exec and non-exec roles, it's just become more and more apparent to me how important it is that the culture and the psychological safety is good if we want to have a great organisation, if we want to provide fantastic safe services, or if we're in a commissioning role, or we're in a national body, whatever, the culture is out of our workers, our workforce, and thereby delivering the best, being a best service in whatever our role is. So having been a Freedom to Speak Up Guardian for a while myself, as well as obviously before Guardians existed, having had opportunities to speak up myself and needed to, or have people speak up to me as a manager. When I saw the role advertised, I thought, I want to help improve that journey for all of us. And I thought, I want to make a difference in that way in my next role. So I put my hat in the ring, and here I am nearly a year on in. And it's been, you asked me my reflections, it's been a really great first year. I have had the privilege of meeting many Speak Up Guardians. I've had the privilege of going to organisations and meeting leaders and frontline staff and talking about these really important issues and sharing learning. And that's what I want to continue for all of us.
And what the podcast listeners can't see, but I can see, but hopefully I think they can hear, is there's a kind of passion that comes through. You're quite animated as you talk about why you want the job, and you're quite animated about engaging with the Guardians and engaging with the Guardians and engaging with the front line. So that comes through, and that must be fantastic for the Guardian community to kind of have that advocate for them. One of the things that I know we've touched on when we've spoken before is the business of creating the right culture, or the consistent culture. Because again, like you, I've worked in places in the health service where actually you can go from department to department and feel differences. and it's that inconsistency that often bedevils us. And of course the risk as leaders is that we see the areas that do it really well, and we're kind of slightly, we have a blind, we see the areas that do it really well, and we're kind of slightly, we have a blind spot for the areas that don't do it so well. So there's that first point about the blind spots, and then there's a related point about listening, that actually this isn't just about people speaking up and having systems and having a person or people who come around. It's about the challenge of what it really means as a leader, as a board, to listen, to truly listen. And I again, any reflections on that based on your career, but also this last year?
Yeah, absolutely, Danny. In the People Promise, it talks about that workers, we will listen to understand. And that for me is the key, listening to understand. And we've had quite a few since I've been in post, and obviously over the years, high profile cases where things haven't gone right and things have gone badly wrong. And when you read those reports and when you get underneath what was happening, what seems a consistent theme is leaders didn't listen. They didn't listen to understand. Quite often they might have been defensive and more sort of comfort seeking rather than telling us. You really have to, for me, when I go and visit a new organisation or I speak with a new organisation, often I'll have a look at the staff survey and have a look at those questions on culture. And some, are up in the higher brackets of compared to their peer groups, etc. And we'll be getting, reasonable scores. But I'll say some bit like you said with the consistency. I'll say to them, so this, what are you doing to make sure that like this 60 or 70% who are confident that you do something about patient safety or any matters that they rise, what are you doing about the other 30%? And also that can mask, an average can mask one area might be awful. And indeed, recent high profile cases have shown that. So I think it's really important for us as leaders in organisations, leaders and managers, to make sure we're looking for that consistency. We're looking in every area harder to speak up. We're looking at people on nights. We're looking at workers who work maybe on the bank or short-term contracts, or all those barriers that are there. Because if we're not listening to all, we can be lulled into sometimes a false sense of security that things are okay around here. We're not doing too bad. We're doing better than others. Consistency that you've talked about. So I think that call to leaders to really listen to understand, but it's not just listen. So the next bit is absolutely, and then act upon it. Act appropriately on it, act proportionately, and ensure that that people are knowing that you're following up on what, if it's not to do something, but to tell them why you're not, that you've listened and you've understood, but this is the rationale. Because I think that feedback loop is absolutely key. Yeah, absolutely key.
That makes so much sense to me. And in a previous life, we consciously went on a OD program, and the board involved in that. And one of the things that we had to be trained to do as a board, at the centre of the program was a meeting patients, a process called In Your Shoes, and we had to be trained to listen, because actually our instinct was to explain away. Our instinct was to kind of say, oh, well, that's why this. Say, oh, well, that's why this happened. And it's so that stopped us listening, because we immediately told the person, well, yours is a one-off experience, or your experience is exceptional, or it's not the norm. And of course we weren't listening. And then what they trained us to do was actually to tell the person what it is you've heard. And that was interesting. That discipline was really interesting. And then absolutely it was that kind of, well, and this is what I think we can do to make sure it doesn't happen to another family, or it doesn't happen to in another service. But it was that. And we literally had to be sat down for a couple of hours and trained to do it, because those instincts were quite deep in our call. And do you see Guardians doing that kind of work with boards and senior leaders? There's been a lot of attention in this last few years, rightly, in terms of how we build the confidence of staff to speak up, and how they see the Guardian as an ally and an advocate. And that development piece is quite interesting in terms of those blind spots, in terms of listening to understand.
Absolutely, and it is a key part of the Guardian role, is to support that overarching improvement in speak up culture, not just through the speaking up route, which is that valuable additional route, and so very much I see Guardians who take time in board development sessions and in their regular meetings with their exec and non-exec leads, chief execs and chairs, conversations, and those are really important. I think worryingly though, there are some organisations Guardians don't feel that their leaders understand their role. So in this year's Guardian survey, we do an annual survey of our Guardians. Of the 450 plus that responded to the survey, there was 1 in 10 Guardians were saying they didn't feel that their senior leadership understood the Guardian role. That's a worry. We need to change that, because if the Guardian is to be part of that overarching improvement work for the speak up culture, then clearly leadership need to understand what the Guardian does, how they work with them, and what a valuable resource they are to them in terms of that temperature checking of what workers are saying, and part of that, that's a route, a listening route, most definitely.
Yeah, there's still 25 organisations that have got a long way from where they need to be in terms of that. When we were talking about listening to understand, a lot of what you talked about really resonated with me in conversations that colleagues of colour have with me, in terms of actually, when they raise concerns about racism, about discrimination, that actually the response of leaders can be to kind of try and explain it away, or to seek comfort, to make it, about them, or to whatever it may be. Are there particular within the workforce who you have particular concerns about in terms of their freedom to speak up, that ability of organisations to truly listen?
Absolutely, Danny. So we still see, and there's international research as well as UK research that talks about the biggest barriers for people speaking up still being fear of retaliation, fear of reprisal, retribution in some way, some detriment's going to happen for it, and fear of futility, that's nothing's going to be done. And if you put those alongside, some groups have even more fear or more feeling that it's going to be futile, then that's of great. Organisations and leaders within organisations, we need to ensure that we are getting mechanisms to hear the voices of those who find it harder to share their story, to speak up about what matters for them. And so you've mentioned minority ethnic groups, and that's our research has shown that alongside others. But people with any protected characteristics, we see that for some different groups, some people may find it harder to speak up. Hierarchy, we absolutely know, and there's evidence to show that hierarchy can impact on people's ability to speak up. Grouping, sometimes it's the different staff groups. People in less senior roles or people on non-permanent contracts might feel more vulnerable and open to potential detriment. People who may be digitally poor, if in an organisation a lot of information is shared about speaking up culture and the different routes through the IT systems, then people that don't actually access the IT systems, they're not going to know about that. So, those who are digitally poor, those who I've mentioned before, knights, students, contractors, these are all different groups of workers that may, and I say may because it's not all, and so for me the important bit is that and Guardians, as part of that overarching improvement for speaking up culture, listen and find ways of communicating with those groups, be it through diversity networks or staff groups or focus groups or pulse surveys, those organisations that are really trying to get that consistency. What they tell me they're doing is they're not just looking at the staff survey and the RES data, DES data, they are putting in lots of multiple opportunities to hear and understand, and then change the way they're working with some of those staff groups that might find it harder. I love Brené Brown, and some of the listeners will have heard me say this before, but she talks about trust, and in trust she talks about trust isn't, I'm going to really badly paraphrase, so forgive me, trust isn't built in a single sweeping moment, it's the small interactions. And for me that's the same with a speak up culture. We're in Speak Up Month, great, we're raising awareness about it, we're doing these, Guardians are out there doing masses, we're talking about it, we've got loads of blogs, but that's to raise awareness through October, but for leadership, it's every single day. All those interactions are what's going to build the trust that the organisation is a really listening and acting organisation.
And I know we're probably going to have to draw to a close in a moment, but there are a few things there. I mean, I do think, you know, that there can be a tendency to see engagement as an event, not an outcome. It's something we do in a particular forum or in a particular way, and of course it's not. It is an engagement. It's an outcome. It's a culture, as you said. But I also, actually, there are, throughout this conversation, there are things that can point to risk. There are things that we can take false assurance from. You know, it's about understanding the variation and inconsistency across departments. It's about understanding that actually some groups, just because the majority are engaged in your staff survey, there may be actually groups that feel far less confident, have far less trust in the organisation, and actually how do you reach out to those groups? And then it's about what are the kind of countless processes and countless ways you have to kind of engage. And again, that link you make to the people promise about listening to understand, you know, how do you constantly have that, and how do you check that's working, and the process never ends. I think it's traditional at the end of the podcast for the guest to make a pledge. You're 1 year in, and I am the guest, albeit the one that's had the opportunity to lead the conversation today. And for my part, my pledge at my organisation, NHS Employers, on behalf of my organisation, NHS Employers, is that point about listening, and about listening to understand, and listening to understand, and using our resources and our networks to help my members understand the importance of that in terms of creating a speak up culture.
That's a great Speak Up pledge. Thank you, Danny, and thank you for our time this morning. I've really enjoyed it. My Speak Up pledge at the end of Speak Up Raising Awareness Month is to work with energy and with passion to do everything in my remit to improve speaking up for all workers, and to listen to understand and to act with integrity to help make speaking up business as usual.
Thank you so much, Jayne. It's been lovely to
yeah. Talk to you on another podcast again.
Look forward to it.
Thank you so much, Danny, for taking the time to come on our podcast. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. We welcome your feedback, so please like, rate and comment. Thank you for listening.